Hey, how's it going? Today we are diving into a Jubilee video. They do this surrounded series where they bring someone with, I guess, controversial opinions on and they surround them with 20 people with differing opinions and then they debate for a couple of hours, it seems like, for some of these videos. They've been getting longer and longer. But one thing really caught my eyes. I came across the feed the other day where Jillian Michaels was surrounded by a bunch of representatives from the body positivity movement. But obviously there was a lot going on in the debates, a lot of stuff that I wasn't aware of and stuff that I'm learning about kind of that subculture and that movement. What really caught my eye were that there were a couple of therapists representing the mental health profession in this particular dialogue. And what caught my eye was that I don't think they represented us all that well. So I decided to go back and revisit this video, and we're just clipping the parts where the therapists are talking. I think I captured all of them. Please let me know in the comments if I do miss anything. I'm not here necessarily to correct their clinical knowledge. I understand that this is their field of practice and they have a particular specialty. This is not my specialty, whether it's eating disorders or body dysmorphia or anything like that. But I just wanted to point out some of the things that I think don't translate very well from their area of expertise to debating in this kind of environment, and how that may do a disservice to the way that the profession is perceived in public-facing conversations like this. And of course, I have special interest in this because I'm a therapist myself and I want to see our profession be represented well. So with all that being said, let's dive into these debates in Jubilee's Jillian Michaels versus the body positivity movement surrounded.
Hi, I'm Jillian Michaels. I'm a fitness expert and a health advocate, and today I am surrounded by 20 body positivity activists. All right, my first surrounded claim is that obesity is not healthy, and pretending it is puts lives at risk.
Okay, so these videos follow the structure of this debater puts forth a certain claim, and then each person has an opportunity to run into the middle of the circle, tap the chair, sit down, and debate on this claim. As we'll see, this is pretty typical for all these surrounded videos. The arguments actually go all over the place, and so we'll see how well the therapist and Jillian Michaels are actually able to keep the conversation on track. For this particular claim, obesity is not healthy, and pretending it is puts lives at risk. So I think the claim is that the body positivity movement pretends that obesity is healthy, or that it's not unhealthy, I suppose.
If you want to be the first debater, get to the chair in 3, 2, 1.
Hi. I'm Edie.
Nice to meet you,
I'm an
Edie.
eating disorder therapist. I'm going to do my best to not use the O word because I find it pretty offensive. So I'm going to use fat-bodied as we talk.
This is already not a great look. My understanding is that obese is a medical term. And so again, I'm not trying to dive super deep into the weeds here in terms of this is their area of expertise. So I'm just a relative newcomer, but I think it's a medical term. And so yes, it can absolutely be used in a way that's harmful to people. But I do think this is where starting off on this, like this is the battle that you want to fight, does a disservice to the field of therapy, where our stereotype is like we're so concerned about triggering somebody or saying the wrong thing and coming up with different terminology to describe the same thing. And in some cases it's absolutely appropriate, and in some cases also it can come off a little excessive, and sometimes it feels like we're avoiding the substantive conversation in favor of just making sure everyone says the right words.
Okay. Do you understand why people find it harmful and triggering?
Overweight and obese is literally just having too much body fat. It has nothing to do with the quality of the person.
Yeah, I agree with you on that.
Are we going to debate the claim?
Yeah, I just wanted to.
Gonna,
Yeah, I wanted to clarify though the
are
language.
we going to pretend like I'm a 3 and you're my mommy, telling me how to talk?
Wow. Okay.
Okay.
So the claim that you're saying is that it is inherently unhealthy to live in a fat body.
It's inherently unhealthy to have excess body fat, yes.
Okay. Where are you?
I think this is kind of what we learned in school. My impression of obesity is that it was described as a category because being at a certain level of obesity increases your risk for certain diseases and conditions. So let's see what she has to say to that.
You getting that information from?
Oh, okay. There are dozens of MRT trials that show having excess body fat. Dozens is causal, not correlated.
No, that's not true. There's
Okay, so Now we're talking about how to read research. I don't know MRT trials, that they didn't cover that in our stats class in grad school, but that's a pretty bold claim. If a study is claiming that they found a causal relationship, they have to do some serious research to be able to establish that this is actually causing and not just correlated. If you're determining causation, that means you are establishing that this particular variable causes this other variable to increase or change or something in that vein. A lot of research will establish correlation, that, hey, there's some kind of connection between these two variables. As one changes, the other tends to change as well. But that doesn't necessarily mean that one causes the other. And so it seems like Jillian's coming out swinging in terms of like, you have multiple trials that say they establish that obesity leads to, what does this say here? Excess body fat, particularly at levels classified as obesity, is associated with increased risk of type 2 diabetes, cardiovascular disease, certain cancers, high blood pressure, and premature death. Okay, this says associated with, so that's more in the correlation category rather than the causation. So the fact check might be pulling back our claim a little bit.
No disease that just fat-bodied people get.
I didn't say that. I didn't say that. But obesity lends itself to all-cause mortality across the board. Have you heard of something called adiposopathy? Okay, so you know it means literally sick fat. And you understand how it works? Okay, tell me how it works.
So it's additional layer of fat in the stomach area.
No, that's not what it is. It works as follows. When we eat too much food that has energy that we're not utilizing, the body needs to put that energy somewhere, right? So it puts it in fat cells. So it puts it in initially subcutaneous fat cells, a little bit of visceral fat, which is fat around the organs. And at first you have hyperplasia, which means we're recruiting new little fat cells, which isn't.
As she's doing this explanation right now, this is one thing that really did bother me about this particular therapist. I think her name was Edie, and she is an eating disorders therapist. So if this is her area of specialty, I would expect for her to know some of these terms. Adiposopathy, I think it was. But I think this is where a therapist can sometimes get a bad reputation for us wanting to take part in the medical field and be considered medical professionals, but then we don't get a lot of this medical training, such as being able to identify the causes of certain diseases and conditions. Or like, we are trained in interventions for a lot of these things, but when it comes to medical terminology, we don't actually have required classes for that. And so I think it was a mistake on her part, which it seemed pretty clear that she did not know exactly what adiposopathy was, and maybe she had heard of it, but for her to be unwilling to say, I don't know, please educate me, that didn't come off very well. And for her to just pose a guess and hope that she was right did not speak very well for her credibility as an eating disorders therapist or as someone who is knowledgeable in this debate. So I think we as therapists, we need to recognize what our scope is, what our training provides for us to be able to do, for what interventions we're able to provide, but not to step outside the bounds to be able to talk on medical things when that's not our primary training. And so sometimes therapists do get a rap for being arrogant and overstepping. And I think this is a little microcosm of why that can come across that way.
Necessarily a bad thing up to a point. Now, the issue is that once you can no longer recruit more fat cells, right, you get hypertrophy. So the fat cells start to expand. And this is exceptionally dangerous because what ends up happening is the blood vessels get outpaced. So the fat cells can't get oxygen and they start screaming, literally. And when they do, they release cytokines, inflammatory proteins, right?
I want to pause.
Oh, no, of course you do want to pause. Okay. Because it's irrefutable. You don't even know what I'm talking about. So,
Jillian, okay, first of all, I don't appreciate the way that you're speaking to me right now. You called me out for just trying to understand the languaging and saying I was talking to like a 3-year-old when I felt like I was talking to you very respectfully. You're talking.
Okay, this also doesn't come off very well. It's like, okay, I'm losing this debate because she clearly knows what she's talking about and she's describing something in detail that I was not able to. And it does feel like a pivot to like, hey, you're not treating me respectfully. And yes, maybe Jillian Michaels came out a little hot. And maybe that's the tone that she said. I think it was Dr. Mike who said, I think he's been on Surrounded twice. He said the second time he was intentional about being a little more pushy, a little more aggressive, pushing back on people's views. And so it's possible that Jillian Michaels kind of prepped the same way and just being willing to come out hot and set the tone for the video. And so yes, I own that maybe it felt a little confrontational, but to pivot the subject and interrupt her to say, hey, I think you're being disrespectful right now. Again, not a really great look. And it does feel like a lot of backpedaling when it's like, oh, I've been caught out in an area that I claim to have expertise in, but I clearly don't know as much as maybe I should or feel like I should. And it's kind of a defensive tactic.
To me very disrespectfully right now.
Here's the thing.
And I want to.
You're telling me you understand it, but you don't understand it. You fundamentally didn't describe it accurately.
But what I understand is that
What's lipotoxicity?
I don't want to talk about. I am not. Okay, here I'm going to say this straight out. I am not a medical doctor. Okay, so I'm not going to talk to you about medical diagnosis because that's outside my scope, and I'm fully willing. Hey, I'm fully willing to be wrong. What I am here to talk to you about is the fact that people in fat bodies are irreparably harmed going into the medical system every single day because of the term, the O word.
So again, we're kind of moving the fence post here. Instead of talking about whether obesity is healthy or not, or whether the claim that pretending that obesity is healthy puts lives at risk, we're talking about the medical system and whether using the term obese, or I guess in her mind, the O word, which I've got my own problems with languaging like that. I can get that there are some people who are going to have specific problems and baggage with certain terminology. That just happens, okay? Whether it's because it was used a certain way as you were growing up, or you were bullied using a certain word, or you have certain traumas associated with it, that happens. What I think we're gonna find with a lot of these therapists is that we as therapists deal with individual stories, but we don't make our focus as much on the broad research. We are focused in our day-to-day work on the granular story of the person in front of us, and that's a good thing. The problem then is that we want to take those individual stories and sometimes generalize them out. So maybe she did have a client who really had struggled with the word or the label of being obese. Absolutely, that's fair for some people. But to then say like, oh, we should never use the O word. And even then using the label, the O word says, this is a word to be feared. This is terminology that is frightening, that is scary. And suddenly we've manufactured avoidance and fear out of the way that we use that language. So a couple of things. Yeah, she clearly came in with a certain fight, I guess, that she wanted to pick, and it wasn't related to the claim hardly at all. And then also, I think we're trying to generalize too much from some individual experiences.
So that's what you want to litigate?
Yeah.
Okay, that's not the claim though.
The idea that fat-bodied people are inherently unhealthy is, I believe, incorrect.
You're wrong.
No, I'm not wrong.
There's a robust amount of data.
I'm not wrong.
Okay, so
Because
let
you
me
can't
finish
look-
the
you
thought.
can't look at-
Then let me finish the
Let
thought.
me finish my thought first,
Okay.
please.
Sure.
That's usually what it kind of devolves into. But yeah, at this point though, she is trying to debate the claim, but she's not providing any evidence to say, I think your claim or assumption is wrong. She's just saying, I think you're wrong. I think even at this point, being able to share maybe like a client story may be helpful, of like, oh, maybe the body positivity movement and maybe breaking free from some of the stigma around obesity was really helpful for this client of mine, who was able to then take that freedom and be able to improve their health in a certain way. I don't think she goes in that direction. I think it's just like, no, I don't agree with you. But this is the point where like, that's the point of research, to be able to, in theory, without bias, be able to establish like who's right and who's wrong in this debate.
You can't look at a person's body and tell whether or not tell their health status.
So fat is an endocrine organ. When it overgrows, it does wreak havoc in the body. I didn't finish telling you what happens. So when the oxygen can't get to those fat cells, they'll die and they'll rupture. And then the immune system starts dumping macrophages in to try to clean it up.
But do you know what's
But they
even more
can't clean
unhealthy
it up.
is weight cycling. And as we talked about earlier, only except for your people who
claim.
It's interesting to see all of the people in the backgrounds, little responses. They're shaking their heads and they're nodding their heads when Edie's talking about something. And what I'm catching is like there's a lot of buzzwords being used. And not in the sense like they're fake terms or anything like that, but just like terms that people recognize. Like they're latching onto the weight cycling, which what I gather is like trying to lose weight and you lose some and then you gain it back and then trying to lose some again. And then like there's probably some unhealthy side effects of constantly shifting weight like that. But I don't know how you measure like one is more harmful than the other outside of doing some large scale studies that really try to quantify Is weight cycling more harmful, or is obesity more harmful from an overall health standpoint? And that's really hard to measure. Like, how do you quantify the health, financial, mental health costs of those kinds of things? Really hard to figure out. But I don't think it has to be an either or. Like, you could probably claim that weight cycling is harmful, as well as pretending that obesity is harmful, and it can be a both and, not an either or. So I don't know that this necessarily strengthens her argument.
If you want to talk about that claim, we can. The claim is...
So then what are you supposed to do, though? So let's say this person is in a fat body and they are inherently unhealthy, right? We're telling they're unhealthy because they're in this fat body. What are they supposed to
Will
do?
be significantly more prone to all-cause mortality. For me,
Intentional weight loss fails 95 to 98% of the time. So what
tell
is
me
the...
why, though? You would probably know this better than me.
Because...
Oh, that's an interesting way of her turning it. Let's see what this fact check says. There's no strong scientific evidence supporting a universal 95 to 98% failure rate. One comprehensive review found that about 1/3 to 2/3 of dieters regained more weight than they lost in long-term follow-ups, and it did not support a precise 95 to 98% failure figure. Okay, so based on this fact check, again, I'm not really in this world. I don't specialize in eating disorders and body dysmorphia, so it's hard for me to say. I don't have a lot of research around this, but based on this fact check, it would seem that Edie's numbers are not quite accurate either.
weight is not an individualistic pursuit. You narrow it down to this idea that it's causal, like that they're just not trying hard enough, but that is...
I didn't say that. It's multifactorial, unquestionably.
I know some of you complain that I don't let people talk long enough, but that was definitely a big misstep on the part of a therapist who is supposed to be trained in listening, that she assigned a motive that Jillian Michaels never stated. She stated like an overgeneralization of what she thinks her position is without it actually being explicitly stated. Something along the lines of there's some kind of moral failure if somebody is obese. And she never said that. She's just describing the nature of what obesity does that puts people at risk.
A lot of people lose weight. The problem, right, is that they put it back on. Are we in agreement?
Yes.
Okay, great. Why do you think?
Okay, we got to pause there.
God damn it! All right.
If you haven't watched these videos, the way it happens is if more than half the other participants put up their red flags, that conversation is paused and the timer is paused, and then someone else gets to take the seat. So that was our first interaction with one of the eating disorder therapists debating Jillian Michaels on body positivity and obesity. So far, I don't think she came off super well in that. A lot of deflecting, a lot of gaps in knowledge. And this is not me saying that she has to know everything that Jillian Michaels is talking about, because again, that may not be the primary purpose of her practice and her work, but also the lack of humility. And I do get that in a debate context, this would be really difficult. And I don't think I would present very well in a debate context, but to be unwilling to own that, oh, I don't know that, please educate me, that didn't come off very well either. Let's jump over to the next one here. This is the same claim so far.
What I'm curious about is if you care about people's health and you have people in front of you, and I'm sure you have people online who are telling you that the body positivity movement, or I prefer body liberation, body justice, body acceptance, body blah, all the good shit that we like.
Okay.
Again, this is where therapists might get a bad rep for just being concerned with buzzwords and fancy terminology and changing things up and describing the same problem a different way. That list, I get, like, maybe establishes your credibility with this movement, but it didn't really add much to the conversation. So again, I don't want to judge people too harshly, because I think there's a lot of pressure where you're facing a famous person who is clearly well-versed in what they're talking about, and you're trying to debate them in a public-facing forum where millions of people are going to end up watching. So I get that's tricky. It just doesn't come off very well.
Actually increases their health, then I don't understand your debate. Like, what are you debating if the fat people are telling you it makes their life better?
I'm debating their physical health, and I'm debating the people who claim that you can be physically healthy at any size.
Okay, do you think you can be physically healthy and mentally unhealthy at the same time?
Of course, but that's not the claim.
Okay, sure. I think the part where I get stuck, I am a mental health professional. I work with people from a body liberation standpoint. I work with people in all shapes of bodies. What I know to be true from my experience is that body positivity, body liberation helps people take care of themselves. It's very difficult to understand why you think somebody is going to take better care of a body they hate. Like,
I would have preferred some of these therapists to prepare some evidence or some studies or some research that they can cite, because so far all they've said is, in my experience, what I've seen. And yes, that is valid to the sense of like, carry that over to your clients, especially if you're working in that kind of context with these kinds of clients all the time. Then yes, find stuff that works consistently. And maybe there's not as much research to support that right now, but you can say that, hey, this worked for this client, maybe you can try this. Fine, that's fair. But then to bring that into a debate just doesn't meet the same criteria for being convincing as if you actually had some research to say like, hey, we saw outcomes improve for obese clients who engaged in body positivity interventions, whether it was like engagement on social media or support groups, or I don't know what they do. Like, this is, again, my unfamiliarity with that. But just from a debate standpoint, this doesn't seem to be a strong argument so far.
like why body positivity would not inspire people to take better care of their bodies.
My argument. I never said you should hate your body. In fact, you
No, you
should.
didn't.
Okay, so I don't think that. What I think is that there are people in the movement
Yeah.
who have co-opted healthy at any size, and it went from access to healthcare
Okay.
to quite literally meaning for them that you can be healthy at any size, and that's not true.
Okay. I mean, the studies show that if you're very, 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 very thin, or your body is very, 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 very big, it is more difficult to be healthy. That is absolutely
But
true.
then you agree with me on this point.
Yeah, what's the argument? I thought that's what she was saying. I wonder if it's like the second part of it, the pretending that it is, maybe feels kind of personal to people, like maybe they're living inauthentically. I'm not quite sure. Nobody's really put a voice to that, at least out of the therapists that I've shared so far.
I don't, because I don't think body positivity is the dangerous thing. I think hatred of fat bodies and people hating themselves and people living in self-loathing because they've been taught that their body is the wrong shape, that's the danger.
Both can be true.
I agree with that. Yes, there are mental health components to certain messaging, and we see this with both men and women, where yes, if you don't believe your body is good enough, you will go to some extreme lengths to be able to make it the right shape. That also doesn't negate the idea, based on the evidence that Jillian Michaels presented, that if you are severely obese or potentially severely underweight too, that those could have their own health implications as well.
Once. So let's look at this, right? So the first thing we would want to do, obviously, is incentivize somebody. So it's like, okay, what's the why that's going to allow you to tolerate the how? But hold on.
That's therapy, right? A lot of our clients come to us because there's a change that they probably know they need to make, whether it's quitting a certain addiction or changing the way that they communicate with their spouses or changing their relationship with a certain emotion. They know what they want to do. But she's right. How can we make it tolerable? How can we make the how, the way that we go about it, tolerable enough that they can make the change? How can we, in terms of addiction, how can we motivate someone enough to be able to tolerate withdrawal or be able to find something else to rely on to cope with certain feelings instead of going straight to weed or alcohol? That's actually a very therapist kind of mindset.
Hold on. That's the positive. That's the inspiration piece. Okay. Now, here's the issue. If that piece, if all the things that they get out of it don't serve them as much as the things they're getting out of being overweight, and it does provide quite a lot. I can give you an example.
Wait.
Then they're not going, unconsciously, they will sabotage the change. Can I give you an example so you'll understand it? Okay, there was a kid that I worked with on Biggest Loser. He's 18 years old.
Okay.
He shows up with his dad, Ken. They both lose like 100 pounds. They go home, and they're visiting their family. It's the holidays. Doors fly open, and there's mom. And mom starts crying. And she's not crying tears of joy. She feels like they're going to abandon her, like they broke the contract, like they've outgrown her. And she becomes sad and she withdraws. So what does the 18-year-old do? He starts eating with mom again. What does the food provide him? A connection with his mom.
So you've got some behavioral psych here and some family systems. The behavioral psych piece is where she's saying if the reinforcement for continuing to overeat or engage in unhealthy habits is stronger than your motivation to change, the stronger reinforcement is gonna win out in the end. That's not a moral failing. That's not a willpower thing. And that's what I try to get my clients out of the mindset of. It's not that you're not strong enough. It's that the circumstances are weighed in a certain manner that the reinforcers for the old way of being, the old way of acting is currently stronger. And so we need to change some of the circumstances that make it so you are more reinforced and more motivated and more incentivized to change, because there's already kind of an imbalance. It's easier to keep things the same than to change. And so we have to alter the circumstances to make it more motivating to change, more incentivized to move towards change. And then what she's talking about, family systems, and that like families have their own homeostasis is what it's called, that the family has a culture and a way of being. And so it sounds like the show, The Biggest Loser, disrupted that for this family. And so the mom, maybe unintentionally, unwittingly, reinforced the status quo. And it sounds like the system moved towards homeostasis, the old way of being, because there was not structural change that encouraged and promoted the family towards change. And it was just a couple of individuals, and it seems like mom was a stabilizing force in keeping things the same. Again, not intentionally, not like she was trying to sabotage, but that's how behavioral change works.
I had something similar with my dad. It was one of the ways that we connected. Food provides a lot of people with a lot of different things.
Yes, you cannot eat and not have your parasympathetic nervous system turn on at the same time. There's no such thing as not emotional eating. It's fine. It's good. It's great. Food is great.
But what I'm trying to show you is that if, in some cases, the pain associated with continuing that defense mechanism is greater than the pain associated with change, it helps people change in some cases.
I do have an argument with what this therapist, Paula, I think her name was saying about activating the parasympathetic nervous system. I'll grant her, okay, maybe there's no such thing as emotionless eating. Maybe there's always some kind of emotion or feeling attached to that. Fine. If I grant you that, that does not mean that we just let our emotions dictate exactly what we do. Because that's one of the things that I want my clients to be able to be aware of. You need to be mindful of your emotions, what's going on for me as I eat, so that I can make a choice more in line with my values. It's not just, oh, this feels good, therefore it's okay to do. And I may be oversimplifying her argument, but that's kind of how it came across. Just like, oh, there's no such thing as emotionless eating, so just go ahead and go for it because it feels good. I hope that wasn't her argument, but I don't think she developed it much more than that.
Not in the long term. And I struggle.
Pause there. Sorry, you've been voted out by the majority.
All right, so that is it for claim one. So far, I'm not super convinced by what the therapists have put forth, but we're going to jump ahead to claim two, which is large food companies are one of the primary beneficiaries of the body positivity movement. Very controversial, very striking, and let's see what they have to say about that.
So one thing that I want to clarify, I said it on the sidelines, which I know I shouldn't do, but it's health at every size, not healthy at every size. And you've misspoken that just a couple of times. I just think it's important just for the audience to know that. Because there's a really big distinction there.
Yes, you're absolutely right. And I think it started as health at every size, and I think now it has been co-opted by many or misinterpreted, misutilized. You don't think so? Okay, I've seen very many people say I can be healthy at any size.
Well, I think
or
that,
every
that,
size.
I mean, I think that
I've
that
seen
can be
very many people, and I've debated with very many people who've utilized that point.
Okay. Well, I do. I mean, I personally believe you can be healthy at any size.
I don't.
Okay.
Okay, so I want to have a little nuance here. I'm not sure whether it's like I can move towards being healthy at any size, which I would completely agree with. Like within an ACT model, acceptance and commitment therapy, if you kind of say like, I have this value of health, my health is important to me, then I can be any size, severely underweight, severely overweight, average, whatever, and I can make choices that move me towards being healthier. Yes, I'm completely down with that. But I think the way that she's saying it's been co-opted is like, I don't have to do anything and my body, whatever size it is, can be or is healthy. And I don't know that I'm on board with that.
That's fine. I'm not going to debate that point because I don't think that that's what we're talking about right now. So I want to come back to when you were saying that, you know, big food is profiting off of the body positivity movement, and that's like a really terrible, bad thing. Okay.
I don't think it's good.
Okay. So what is your fear with that? Like, what's the I want to understand your concern.
I don't think we have enough time for me to tell you how deep my concerns are.
So
with
let's
these,
do the
with these guys.
TDRL, the too long didn't read.
I think
Okay, I can give her points for wanting to be able to listen and let her develop her point. I think that is one of the good points here for this therapist.
that they, okay, let's go back. God, all right, if we go back to the 70s, or like late 60s, 5% of American adults were obese or overweight, right? Now it's 74%. Like, what happened? Did everybody just have a moral failing? Was it a quantum leap in genetics?
They
No, I'm
changed the
being
BMI overnight.
hypothetical, what I'm trying, no. Look at pictures.
they did.
Look at pictures of. It's more than BMI. Do you
Which I
realize
don't- which I don't
childhood
agree with, just
Childhood
FYI to the world
obesity
out there,
did
but-
not even. It wasn't even a thing. Type 2 diabetes used to be called adult onset diabetes. What happened over the last 50 years? And what I'm saying is, I don't think it's a sudden moral failure. I don't think it's because.
Oh, okay. Sorry, I was reading the fact check and I'm trying to listen at the same time. But there was a lot of claims apparently that were just made that they were fact checking. So apparently the standards for overweight changed. So some people became overweight or classified as overweight without any change in their weight, but obesity cutoff remained the same. Okay, so that's some helpful context to what they're talking about.
74% of American adults are lazy and weak and stupid and pathetic. I don't think so at all.
Is a moral failure?
No, you're misunderstanding what I'm saying. I think it's not. I think.
But you do think
when
it's
we
an
look at-
individual's responsibility when they do become in a fat body.
Oh, okay. So this is getting into a really interesting debate, which is really fascinating because I thought therapists were all about like the systemic change, and Jillian Michaels is actually arguing that there is a huge systemic problem when it comes to food industry and obesity. Like she's saying this is not an individual problem. It's not that like 50 to 75% of adults just suddenly lost the will to exercise or that they are lazy or that is a moral failure, but that something in the landscape changed that stacked the odds against individual American adults from being able to manage their weight the way that they might want to. And this therapist seems to be pushing against that, which I find very interesting because of all the talk that we have about kind of systemic failures and systemic problems. But yes, also there's a sense of individual responsibility that each client has to weigh for themselves, whether it comes to the wide availability of vaping. Like, yes, there's a systemic problem where the odds are stacked against you that vaping is advertised and it's in the culture and all of your peers seem to be smoking or vaping. But then, yes, where does the individual responsibility lie to still take control of your own health? I think that's a more fascinating and helpful conversation is how much resource do we dedicate to making systemic change while also encouraging individual people, maybe through support, maybe through the body positivity movement, to be able to reclaim their own health from these companies that are profiting off of people's lack of health.
I think that the system is largely rigged, and 74% of American adults are having a real hard time fighting against it for a host of reasons. Hold on, for a host of reasons. One of those big reasons, one of those huge reasons is big food. And when you look at
But if big food, wait, can I want to pause you there? Because if I know that you're very big in the MAHA movement, and you're saying they're doing all of this amazing stuff, but then they cut SNAP benefits. And so access to food is such a huge reason for people to be able to have a nutritious diet. So how can you explain that when you're saying that big food is awful, terrible, all of these things, but then still align yourself with the movement that cut billions of dollars to people to get access to food?
okay, hold on. I'm not.
Okay, on the surface, I can appreciate that argument where if you're going to say that you value people being able to have individual responsibility and eat well, and then you cut off resources for them to be able to access that food, yeah, there's a problem there. Again, it's a systemic problem. So let's see how she responds to that.
Not saying this movement is perfect, but I would not like to see people, what is called nutrition assistance, I don't think that's soda and chips and candy. Now, having changed the food pyramid, it's calories, it's not nutrition. I do think changing the food pyramid has now mandated that access to the foods on the food pyramid is going to make it more available, and it's going to take the hundreds of billions of our tax dollars that these guys captured in a subsidy flow The food pyramid is not about guidance for you, me, you. The food pyramid is about grabbing $600 billion over the past 2 decades to grow ultra-processed food from the shitty-ass GMO crops that are covered in poison, that then get grabbed by big food and loaded with more poison, and then tinkered with so you quite literally cannot eat just one. I think these guys are the devil. I do.
Wow. Okay. Lot going on here. She lost me a little bit with the food pyramid, but I think her basic premise is that the food pyramid is a way for these companies to be able to get certain subsidies, which allows them to create these more, it sounds like she's saying basically more addictive foods. Okay, so the fact check says some researchers argue certain ultra-processed foods may have addictive-like properties. That's interesting. No broad scientific consensus that foods are addictive in the same clinical sense as drugs. Okay, fair. So like there's something along that spectrum where they are harder to quit, but not quite addictive in a clinical sense. And I can see the passion that she has for that. I'm curious how this therapist responds.
And the depth of my feeling about this, unfortunately, like this is what I mean. I don't, if we're going to indict someone, like when you look at intuitive eating, it's awesome in theory. Feel your fullness. You can't. You cannot.
I disagree with that, though.
We're out of time.
I don't know what intuitive eating is. Please do educate me in the comments below. It is interesting that I don't know whether this therapist is just so caught up in like, I have to oppose everything that she says, but I feel like this would be right in line with what a lot of therapists would generally in like other arenas agree with, is that there's a system that's rigged against the individual because companies tend to want to make a profit and don't care about the individual so much. No broad generalizations here. Jillian Michaels seems to be arguing vehemently against these big companies being able to profit off of people like that. And just at the end, she's like, I don't agree. And so not quite sure what to make of that, but that if that is the case, then that really does take a lot of the stigma off the individual person, that it's not that you have a moral failing or that you have a weak will that you're not able to lose weight. It's because the deck is stacked against you. And again, I'm not trying to pass judgment on like whether or not these claims are true, whether I agree with them or not. I'm just kind of looking at how do the therapists present themselves. And so far, I think my judgment would be we don't really belong in the debate context. And when we try to force ourselves into that debating context, so far these two have not shown up very well, I don't think. So the next bit I want to jump into is her next claim, which is body positivity movement oversimplifies disordered eating and trauma. This is where I would expect the therapist to really jump in and show out, right? Like these two are both eating disorder therapists, or they work with people with disordered eating and trauma. Like these are our wheelhouses. And what was interesting was that neither of them actually entered into the circle during this. So we're just going to listen to some of the way that Jillian establishes her claim and argues it, and then we'll talk a little bit about that too.
My next surrounded claim is that the body positivity movement oversimplifies disordered eating and trauma.
I'm not going to assume, but I imagine you have some sort of maybe personal experience with eating disorders or disorder eating?
Definitely as a kid, would overeat. I wouldn't say binge eating disorder, but I would compulsively overeat. I would eat, have a connection with my father. I would eat to feel a sense of comfort. I would eat to feel a sense of control, without question.
And did you feel shame and then go to therapy to work on that, or did you just oversimplify it and then kind of?
I didn't oversimplify. I was 13, 14, and 15, so I didn't have the bandwidth to process what was actually going on. I was in therapy for other things that were going on in my household, and I definitely was helped.
Okay. So I'm glad that you were able to, go to therapy. That's not something that everyone is able to go to. It's a luxury and a privilege for a lot of people, especially in the United States. I have dealt with an eating disorder since I was 7. That's when it was first realized. It wasn't diagnosed at 7, but it was realized at that point. And my body fluctuated. I'm not going to use numbers because I think there are a lot of people that have disordered eating that use numbers as a metric. And so they'll look at me and I'll say a metric, and then it'll cause someone to have what I like to call a shift in where they are now to where they're going to be down like a rabbit hole of disordered eating behaviors.
Okay, so as they're talking, I can appreciate how this is a little bit more respectful. They're just kind of mutually sharing their stories. And I can appreciate that Jillian Michaels and this person are both willing to listen and regard each other's stories. And I think this is where the therapist can actually be really helpful, where in theory we should be studying the research, getting additional training, research-backed training, that then we listen to somebody's story and notice some of the trends of the impacts that eating and our emotions and maybe our traumas, how those all interact, like Jillian Michaels was talking about, or what this person is sharing about her own story, and to be able to distill that down into, okay, based on what you're saying about, okay, this is what eating does for you, or this is what it's providing for you. Here are some ways that maybe we can adapt some of these research-based techniques to be able to move you towards the goal that you want.
And I think that trauma and eating disorders go hand in hand, but they're not exclusive. There are people that don't necessarily have any trauma, but somehow have developed some sort of eating disorder. My eating disorder was something that I had from a really young age, and then just worsened because of my physical perception around people. But it wasn't something that innately was trauma-based. I am neurodivergent, and it was never diagnosed until I was, almost 30. So, but that's not because of trauma. That's just because of my neurodivergence. That's how my brain is connected. And so sometimes with neurodivergent people, they have eating rituals, eating routines that are rigid. And so that's where mine came from. So to say it's oversimplifying EDs, like body positivity is oversimplifying EDs, oversimplifying trauma. You're taking away the people that that use the body positivity moment to find someone who they can relate to, and so someone that they can connect with that doesn't have the same road that maybe the masses had, but has their same road. Yeah.
You've been voted.
Okay, I don't know that we covered a lot of ground in terms of that particular claim, but I think one of the things that she pointed out was very helpful in that having this kind of movement where there is this body positivity does encourage people, just like we talk about ending the stigma around mental health. If you're able to at least talk about whatever struggles you might have when it comes to your body, that can be a powerful thing. And I think the fundamental thing that Jillian Michaels is arguing against in the entirety of this video is that it is extended a lot beyond that support and ending the stigma. All right, we're gonna do one more segment here where I was interested to see Jillian Michaels talking about the body positivity movement is fundamentally disempowering, and she uses some psychological and behavioral principles to be able to illustrate that. So I wanna do that one before we finish up here today.
Or what do you mean it's disempowering?
Okay. Well, I perceive it as follows. First, it's externalized shame, as opposed to appreciating that this is something that does arise within. And if you'll hear me all the way out, I think I can illustrate that for many it is actually a choice, which I know sounds shocking to you, but just stay with me. So it externalizes it first, and then it invalidates it right off the top, right? It's bad, it's evil, it's this, it's that, instead of like, what can we explore, what can we learn here?
Okay, so if she's talking about like the shame associated with like my sense of my body, that is very interesting because when we're talking about mindful principles, this is the normal way that people tend to be reactive towards certain emotions that they're uncomfortable with, shame being one of the primary ones. As soon as I start feeling shame, I want to get away from it. I want to externalize it. I want to say like, this is not me. I don't want to think about this. I don't want to deal with this. And so there are tons of ways that we try to escape shame, whether it's through addiction, whether it's through avoidance and thoughts, or behaviors, a lot of different avenues. So what she's talking about is, hey, let me be able to engage with this feeling of shame. Let me be mindful of it. Let me explore that and see what I can learn from it. And that's what I try to encourage with my clients whenever we're doing mindfulness is, okay, notice the discomfort. Notice how your body is feeling and really dig into that instead of, ooh, I don't like that. Put up a wall or get away from it or get it away from me.
And then it replaces it with things that I think are platitudes and really difficult to believe. Like, oh no, I'm perfect, I'm beautiful, this, that, but it's not so easy to just believe those things.
Yeah, so what she's talking about is one of the challenges that I have with cognitive behavioral therapy. And this is not to denigrate, like it's the gold standard right now. But what we're talking about is like a lot of times people think the reframing is just like saying these kind of platitudes. Oh, I'm a good person. Oh, I'm actually popular. Or I'm actually doing really well. What happens is that you can't convince yourself of something that you don't know is true. Not applying this to the body positivity movement, but what she's describing is you can't just kind of like inception a new way of thinking into your brain. It's not just I say this thing and I believe it to be true. Otherwise, I wouldn't have any clients. I would just tell them, hey, tell yourself this instead. Or they would have figured that out themselves and they would never need to see me. I would love it if that were true, if we could just tell ourselves something once and then have it be true for us for the rest of our lives. I am oversimplifying CBT. So it is a lot more than that, but it sometimes gets oversimplified to that, where it's just like, oh, I have to think positive. And I think she's making that analogy between the body positivity movement is just telling people to believe positive about themselves, and that is not a way towards lasting change.
A lot of work that comes along with believing those things. So it can feel like gaslighting. And then the last thing is, like, anybody who tells you otherwise gets framed as a victimizer. And concern can be shut down where I think it might be necessarily appropriate. So the way I would handle shame would be very different than the way I perceive the movement handling shame.
Okay, so one thing I want to draw on with what she was just saying there, again, her argument seems to be the way the body positivity movement goes is that they seem to be very quick to label someone as against you or a victimizer. And again, this is her argument, not mine. I have no clue with the body positivity movement. You can let me know in the comments below. But so if anyone is not fully on board with your experience, then they're against you. And this can have a very isolating effect because the people who most care about you, parents, family members, significant others, are the ones who generally feel the most safe trying to point out something that you might be doing wrong. And this happens in addiction also. The people who are most willing to call out the ways that you're hurting people around you are the ones that are being hurt. Your parents, your family, your closest friends, they're the ones trying to say, hey, there's something wrong with the way that you're living your life. And if you're very quick to dismiss those people as against you because they're not fully supportive, then you end up with very little support in the end.
And the same with acceptance. I think acceptance is key. But when I look at acceptance in terms of helping people, I like the serenity prayer best when it comes to Alcoholics Anonymous, right? So it's, God, give me the strength to accept what I cannot change, right? Give me the courage to change the stuff I can, and give me the wisdom to know the difference. I don't see 2 and 3 in the movement.
Yeah, that language is really helpful when it comes to any kind of behavior change. First, we have to be able to identify, what do I actually have control over? And so this gets to some of the systemic issues, like I can't control what the big food companies do. I can't control what my local grocery store puts in the aisles. But what can I control about my life that can move me towards the goal that I want? And of course, this is assuming that someone has a certain goal related to health. If that's not even on their radar, completely separate conversation. But I appreciate how she's able to illustrate that and how, in her mind, this is how she balances between some of those big picture changes that need to happen from a systemic standpoint, as well as the individual responsibility. And then what we're seeking is the wisdom to know the difference and be able to navigate between the two. So again, as we've gone through these clips, my main focus was not on whether her arguments were more valid or better than the others. My focus was primarily on the therapists and how they presented their arguments. Again, I was not very impressed by the way they presented their arguments. Again, I think we tend to work from an individual lens, which is totally fine within the scope of our work. But then when we're trying to make sweeping generalizations or about like, this is how the psychology of people struggling with eating disorders works, or this is what helps for people with eating disorders, or what causes more harm, we need research to back that up. We can't just do that based on our experience as professionals. That may carry some weight in the sense of like, I have seen this work, and you can present it as that, but to have it as a blanket statement is not very helpful. And then some of the things I came through, I think, and I hope unintentionally, were perhaps some of the professional arrogance and some of the over-focusing on terminology as a way of avoiding triggering or just avoiding difficult emotions in general. That's an unhelpful stereotype for therapists to be perpetuating. And again, I hope they didn't do that on purpose. I hope that was just informed by their experience, that maybe some clients have had trouble with that. But again, in that kind of debate setting, not very helpful and not very convincing. So would I do better if I were put on this show? I don't think so. I'm not a debater in that way. I'd probably just end up doing a therapy session for the person who I was debating against. So this is not to say I would do any better, but this is just like things we need to be aware of as counselors, as therapists, as mental health professionals, just to know what our professional limitations are, what our training equips us to be able to do well, and what it doesn't equip us to do well. And if we want to expand beyond that scope, let's get the training to be able to do so. I encourage you to watch the full video. It's fascinating. It's a long watch, but there's a lot going on there that if this resonates with you somehow, I think would be worth watching, and just to see some of the perspectives. So yeah, let me know in the comments what you all think, what you thought of these therapists and how they presented themselves, as well as maybe some of the arguments too. Please do let me know what your experience has been. If you are involved in the body positivity movement, or if you've struggled with disordered eating, I would love to hear your stories also. So thank you so much for watching. I'll see you all next time.